Welcome, everybody, back. This is part two of a four-part series on student safety and wellness, sponsored by and supported by the great folks over at Linewise. For a little more information about them, check out the banner scrolling across the bottom of your screen right now. That's linewise.com/learn more. And those of you that tuned in last week saw that I was doing this live and in location at FETC. Today, I'm doing it from my cabin in the woods. Not really, this is virtual. Uh, but I'm excited today to invite onto the broadcast a good friend of mine, someone I've known over the years, followed his work well before I ever met him. And so I'm going to invite Mike Ribble up right now. Mike, how you doing, sir?
Wonderful. Thank you for Carl for having me on. It's great to see you and great to be out there and doing it again.
So before we get into any of the questions, tell our audience, like, what's your background? What do you do?
Sure.
Why are you an expert in this field?
Well, I was just talking to my students the other day, and I was thinking this is year 20 that I have been talking about digital citizenship and all the issues and topics around it. I wrote my first article for L&L back in 2003. So, it's been quite a ride in being able to meet people here in the US, internationally, every place to talk about the issues around it, and what we've done to build on the topic. And I know we'll hit on some of those things, but we're we've seen the transitions over time. What's happened with it, what's happened to technology in our schools, and what's going on. So still riding the digital citizenship train and talking about it. But of course, as well as a lot of people, that I'm also a tech director. That's what I do on my regular days. But all of us have to have that side gig too. Remember, or so
Yeah.
it's a little bit of everything. So. But it's great to be here. Great to talk to folks again. I know that the last couple of years been tough, and I think we're on a good track now.
Well, I think it's funny that you think that as a tech director you have regular days, because I think every day as a tech director I experienced was irregular, but
Yes,
which leads us into the topics actually. So,
sure.
expert in the field, you do a lot of work around this. You've been doing a lot of work around this for decades. I can't think of many people in this industry actually that have as much experience as you. Let's look forward first before we look back a little bit. Trends right now, we'll talk specifically around cyberbullying, but we can open this up to a
hmm
larger kind of a digital citizenship conversation too, because those are kind of the main focal points of today's talk. What do you see? What are the trends lately? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse around cyberbullying?
Yeah, this is one of those topics, that it's been around for a long time. Even in the early days, we were talking about cyberbullying, and even back to the old the online, early groups that were put together even before social media came on and all of that. There was all of there was potential cyberbullying that was going on, but definitely when we put the tablets in the hands of students and put them out there, it just added a whole nother level of issues. And now that we saw more during the COVID time, where people were using this interactive,
Oh yeah.
the Zooms and the Teams and the all of these things. So now you've added a whole nother layer of potential cyberbullying that could go on. And of course now everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's connected, it's always with them. So you we used to say, oh well, you could get away from it, get away from school. Well, then it was, well, it was on the computer in the house, and then but usually it was a computer that was there. And
You put it in
we
the
talked about
center.
that.
Yeah, put
Yeah,
it in
it
the
was
center of your
there,
house, right?
in the
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yeah.
Remember? I mean,
Yeah, I remember
it
that.
was it was the center of the house. And now everybody is dispersed all over the house, and we've got Wi-Fi coverage everywhere. And it it's an ongoing issue. And I think that with it and a lot of other things that I think we'll probably touch upon. But these are the issues that we've been talking about. And I was just reading an article that came out a couple of years ago, and they were talking about the same things we talked about in the early 2000s. Is how do you deal with this? I mean, how do you, how do you get this issue, and we want it to just go away. And as a former administrator, as for a former assistant principal, I can kind of understand where, let's just block everything and let's move on to something else. But we all know that that's not going to just solve the issue. It just because we block it in one place, it's going to pop up someplace else. So a lot of the trends that were, before are coming back. Definitely parents being involved in this process, having that conversation, being, having, those often difficult, pieces. My kids came up through it, in the early days of, social media and all of that. And, my youngest daughter, who's now 27, so I mean, not young anymore, but she ran into this whole cyberbullying thing, in the early days. So, it was, definitely a topic that we had to deal with in our families. But that's that, beginning place. And now that we're providing devices and, allowing kids to have these younger and younger, we have to have those discussions in our homes. But then when we get to schools, to me, it's just like any other conversation about any other curricular area. We have to build upon, topics. So when Marty and I did this last book, we really broke down the elements and talked about it in this safe, savvy, and social. And pardon the alliteration, but that's what we went with, is those building blocks of what kinds of things do we need to be talking to our kids about. And safety is almost ubiquitous with anybody that talks about digital citizenship. Safety is that base level, and we've got to start there, and then we build upon those. But it's just like in English language arts. I mean, you don't just assume that kids know what nouns and verbs are, when they come to school. Why should we assume that kids know about passwords and multi-factor and how to even care for devices and all of those things? I mean, what why do we make that assumption in one area but not in another?
Yeah, as somebody who also tech savvy with kids, I have 9, 11, and a 14-year-old here who've, were born with it. I mean, in some ways, my youngest, when she was 18 months old, I had her on an iPod Touch. There's video of her that went viral of her like surfing and learning how to go to certain videos before she could even read. Um, that to me, it's an interesting thing because I feel like I am still behind, even though I'm a tech savvy dad. I can only imagine the average everyday household who's not, probably thinking about this on a regular basis, thinking about safety. I mean, if I said the word multi-factor authentication, my kids, their heads would spin. They're like, "What are you
Mhm.
talking about, Dad? MFA? What is that? Is that a
Yeah.
bad word?" I'm like, "No, it's not a bad word." But that's so that gets me kind of this next point, and I think you kind of hit some of this already because it used to be the computer in the middle of the house, and that was the thing, and that was like that was step one for parents. Let's talk about this though. For this question from a lens, since 2007, when your first book came out, there's a lot of stuff that's changed, obviously, at the household, social media, everywhere. Let's talk about it from the lens of the administrator or the teacher now. What Because I think back in 2007, or even a couple years after that, it was like, well, we'll hold a digital citizenship night. We did this a lot in our district too, right? Everyone's got devices, so we're going to have these once a night, once a year things. What's changed in your mind in digital citizenship and how it's being educated in schools, or maybe what should still continue to change?
Well, I hate to say it, but I'm afraid that those are still things that happen. They still have that once a year, twice a year kind of thing, discussion as far as for parents. And I know it's tough for parents because I mean, there's so many things that are pulling
Yeah.
everybody in multiple directions. Um, what's changed? We have more devices, we have more access, more involvement, and what is, I think, even more concerning for me is that, now, we have this sort of, investment in the technology, and that, we believe a lot of the things that we see and hear and all of those pieces, and that's that next level. It's that becoming more savvy and understanding. But it's hard for us, even in the tech field, to understand what's different, what's
Yeah.
real and what's not. We talked about it in the last election about all of the postings, but were they just bots that came out of Russia, out of Iran, different places all over the world, or were they real? And now with AI, and I know you've been
Yeah.
talking about it, and I know we'll kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit, but AI has added a whole different level of what is real for educators and for our parents. So when you start talking about digital citizenship, you know that to me is now one of the most critical factors is how do we begin to share when and where those things are appropriate, when we should and when should students be looking at, okay, yes, I understand that chatbot GPT can,
Mhm.
write my paper, but should I, have that, or should I be using that? And as a teacher, then what am I going to do with that? And you asked about administrators. They're saying, "Hey, well, let's just block it. We're going to block chatbot, and we're going to be done with it." Well, we all know that we're not blocking it in their houses,
Or on their
unless
phones.
unless
Yeah.
they're on their own, a school device, and we're filtering it off site. But they could get on their own devices. Heck, they could get on their own phone. And I've got a chatbot GPT app on my phone that I can type in something and it'll spit out 5,000 words on a topic. So it's it's more of the same. It's more of not just even being literate anymore. We talked about literacy as one of the elements, and one of the things that Marty and I talked about was moving it even beyond just literacy. We have to be literate, but we also have to be fluent in what's going on and what's going on around us, because as you just said about being a parent and not being plugged in, what would I do with all of this? I mean, heck, if my kid's getting A's in school
Yeah.
because he's using chatbot to write his papers, you know, eh, if I bury my head in the sand, I mean, I could think, hey, that's great. He's getting the grades, and he can go on to higher ed, or get a great job, or whatever. So it's really understanding what's all going on, and even for us that's in it, it's a tough thing. So it's a constantly evolving thing. And I thought at one point, if I dug deep enough, I'd finally hit something that said, okay, here, you've reached that. It's kind of like the old you've reached the end of the
The
internet,
internet. Yeah.
the thing, that, okay, I've seen the whole internet, okay, now I can
I
stop.
could turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of hit on this. I'm going to bring it up too. We're just talking about this, some of the new technologies, and I mean, what you were just saying, let me unpack a little bit about what you're saying. So, in some lens, I think you're right on point with this whole idea that basically kids could use tools to basically play the game of school to get the A, which tells me a couple things. One is, I think we maybe focus so much of our attention on the tool that maybe we should focus our attention a little bit more on like what the actual kid is learning and how we're teaching it. That's a big, giant, hairy thing that nobody wants to unpack. So they do what you just said. Well, we'll
Mhm.
block it. We'll figure out a way
Yeah.
to block it, because the honest truth is maybe the questions we're asking the kids isn't that great. But that's a whole, again, that's a whole nother podcast, whole nother web series. And then I started thinking about, since probably even since you came out with the 9 elements, I mean, well, that was right around that same time, the deep fakes and the idea that you could
Mhm.
have these, someone could be talking right now on a screen. It could be me, and this could not be me, right? It could be someone wearing my face with my voice, is getting closer to. So that how do we authenticate what is real and what isn't? So when it comes to this conversation in the home and also at school, like what do you think? I guess this is kind of going back to that trend question too. Is like, at what point do schools need to really reflect and look inward and say like, okay, maybe we're asking the wrong questions when it comes to trying to avoid or escape this stuff, and instead maybe we should embrace it and figure out how do we make this better for kids learning.
No, I think you're right on point. I mean, it's the nice thing that I've seen with all of the articles on the chatbot and all of that is now there's a lot of educators that are saying, hey, we need to embrace what's going on. We need to be able to have these conversations. And I saw an article. It was an AP teacher that was talking about, hey, I'm going to have my students go ahead and use chatbot. They're going to take it and then deconstruct it of what it wrote, and then I'm going to take it and they're going to do a comparison paper on what it wrote, what it got wrong, and how I would improve upon it. And you're going to show me both of them. You're going to show me the original, and you're going to show me what you did to be able to show that. And I think that goes to your whole thing of, are we asking the right questions? Because you know even when the internet, we started to get more and more web access in our schools, it was like we heard the same thing. Oh, the kids, all they're going to do is they're just going to copy
Google's,
and
yeah.
paste, and they're going to they're going to do and I even back then I was thinking, I had a World Book encyclopedia in my family's home. And
You're
you
dating
know
yourself now, yes.
oh gosh, I'll tell you, it's I've been around a little while, but I'll tell you, you know, I can't tell you how many other of my friends that would have just copied, right out of the
Oh,
the uh,
sure.
the encyclopedia. Now, some educators would say at least you were learning because you were actually physically writing it, but that's to be debated as well. But we saw this same kind of thing, when the internet kind of really took hold, that it was going to ruin education, it was going to be the downfall of everything, and we just need to turn it off. And of course, there was always the people that said, "Oh, it's just a fad. The
Yeah.
internet will be around for a few years, and then we'll go back to the way we were." But those things just haven't happened. But I think that we have to understand first, what's going on, and then we have to expand on it. And I know that that's the tough part for principals and educators, is where do I put this? Where can I fit this in to be able to work on this? And a lot of what we talked about in the last book was really trying to embed this into the different curricular areas, which again makes you as an educator, you have to kind of up your game as well. I mean, you really have to understand all of these. And what I've told a lot of my graduate students is, let's take this a bit at a time. Learn an app this year, learn a idea, but build upon that. Look at something else next. And how do you fill your tool belt? We talk about that as tech directors and all that. Adding all of these different tools that can be added in there. But it's really a willingness to step back and to look at it. But I know that there's so much that's going on right now, and the social emotional is huge in our schools. And all post COVID, we're seeing it here. We've seen it in different districts that we're kind of relearning how to learn. And I think that this is part of it. I think that bringing this in and understanding it, and how do we move to that next level.
And I think this kind of goes right into this question, and you've hit it a couple times just in that last point, and that is, who's owning this conversation in schools? Because I think that evolution since your first book to your last book has been tremendous. Like you just mentioned there, having these embedded ideas and practices for teachers. I remember there was a period of time where the librarians were like the ones, copyright law, and you go to the librarian for that. It sounds like what you're saying is it should be owned by everybody, but also like the second part of this question I'm going to throw at you is, when do we start this conversation? I think you've
Mhm.
mentioned, pretty early on, but what does that look like to you? Like, what is the ideal scenario of a school that's doing this right? Who owns it? And then when do they start it?
Yeah, like you said, I think that everybody's got to be involved, from the parents, if they're going to be involving those devices. But you know we don't say, don't teach your kids to read before they come. I think that, some of the needs to be built upon. But it's funny that you talked about, when this to start this. My wife's a third grade teacher, so we have these discussions on a pretty regular basis. And she was talking about, that the lower grades, aren't as on the devices, or
Sure.
should they be even on the devices. And I said, you know I don't know that they need to be on the devices all the time, and I'm not advocating that, but I think we need to start building the skill sets. So, how do we begin to have them understand how to interact with a device, how to, even things like passwords, and how you would, put those in. We have a fair number of teachers that say, well, kids can't do passwords until they're 13, 14 years old. Well, in this day and age, you really can't just say that. It's now with cybersecurity being such a big deal, we have to start involving the kids in this process. But do we start off? Am I going to be teaching about chatbot to a kindergartner? No, I mean you're
Yeah.
not. But you have to start setting some of that frame so that when they get to that place, they understand that this isn't a toy, that this is a tool for you in the classroom, and how you can utilize that to, you know, get to what you want. Now, it may be a cartoon, or it may be, an animated piece, that does that, but it needs to be seen as this is an educational aspect. It's not just I'm going to go on and play, and we use it for that, and I get that,
Sure.
but you have to balance that. Everything has to be in some sort of balance of how do we integrate that in. And I'm not saying this is easy, because that's one of those things where it's just coming down, as an administrator, oh, just put that into your classroom, and
Yeah.
it'll all work out. Well, you as the teacher have to understand how that looks, and what that does, and how it can disrupt, but it also can elevate as well. And that's why I think things like AI and chatbot, and all of these can really take us, perhaps to the next level of education, if we look at it from a perspective of, okay, maybe now we don't have to do these mundane things. Now we can take it to the next, it will give us this base, and we can take it to the next place. And I know that's hard for some kids. It's like, oh, I don't want to have to, I don't want to learn more stuff. I just, I want to get by. But
Right.
I think that, some realized later, hey, I wish I would have done X
Yeah.
then.
I think, and I was thinking about recently, my fourth grade daughter came home and told me that her teacher had used Chat GPT last week in her classroom. And I said, oh, tell me more about it. And she didn't know what it was called. She said, some sort of
Mhm,
AI thing. And I was like, okay, cool. What is it? And she said, well, they wrote a letter that was like, what was my, oh, it was a reflection on a trip they had taken over winter break
mhm,
as a fourth grader. And so she plugged it in and it spit out this letter. And all the kids looked at the letter and they all kind of looked at it and was like, oh, that's very generic. And she's like, okay, well, how can we make this better? Well, let's take this word out and change it with maybe a little more colorful language, or not colorful, that's a bad word. that could
mm,
that could be different. A better adjective, let's say, or a
mhm,
better so using it as a skill set to say, here's our base, but let's make it better, let's improve upon it with what we have. And I like that she, instead of blocking it, said, here's a tool out there, but know that it's the beginning, it's not the end.
mhm,
um, the other thing I've noticed that I don't feel like this is probably before the pandemic, but I feel like the last few years, I don't know if you noticed this too, but this idea that we can have an argument
mhm,
and a disagreement online. This again is probably a whole larger conversation when it comes to our society as a country and in general, because politics and religion aside. But how do we teach kids? And then I put in parentheses there for my own edification. How do we
sure.
teach adults this too? To have discourse online without it really turning ugly? Because I always joke that you can't win an argument on Facebook with an adult. If you have your point and they have their point, you're going to carefully craft a typed message that you've thought out versus like an in-person discussion. So where does that start with our kids? And then, and does it need to start with technology, or maybe it doesn't? Maybe we don't need tech to start with that either. Maybe we can do this just by having discussions in the classroom.
And I think that, there's a lot of great teachers that are trying to do that and having, that more open conversation. But I think as a society, yes, I think we're going to have to step back a bit and really evaluate what this looks like. And what technology, to me, the reason that it gets kind of drawn into this is it becomes this sort of faceless ability
Hmm.
for me to say something. And some people, I found it's a way to poke at people. They do it just because they think it's fun,
Yeah.
but some are so, drawn into their own conversation that they can't seem to look at anything else, that that's just not, they don't have the willingness or the ability to look outside that. And I think that, when we talk about, any kind of discourse, can we have a civil discourse about something that we disagree on? I mean, if you have one idea and I have another, can we at least have a discussion on a level that we can both share our opinions, but also can walk away at the end and say, okay, I understand that you have that opinion. You may not have changed me, but at least I understand that there's other opinions than mine that are just as valid to somebody else. And I think that tech can really help that. I mean, I think it's a an open conversation that we can have with people, but instead of hiding behind it, how do we make that part of who we are, that we're willing, as Mike or Carl or whoever, that we can share, what we believe in, but also have other people that don't put in the comments, well, that was really, really stupid, and I can't believe that
Yeah.
okay, I understand you may not agree with the things that I say, and I will tell you, in the past 20 years, not everybody's agreed with everything that I've talked about in digital citizenship,
Same here.
for a
Yeah.
long time, and it still is around that people think that having the digital in front of citizenship should be gone. We should
Mm.
just drop it. And I have listened to them, and I understand where they're coming from. I just don't, that to me isn't the way that we could get that across. Because if I go on the street and I ask 20 people, what does citizenship mean to you? Very few are going to talk anything about technology. They're
True.
going to talk about voting and,
Being
being
civic
part of a
minded. Yeah.
community. Now, is that part of digital citizenship? Sure, it is. But we need to be able to cross that over and have more of that conversation. Maybe one day it will all be ubiquitous, and and there won't be a need for this other piece. But today, I think we still need to have that discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you keep the digital tag on there until that ubiquity you mentioned really becomes where we can kind of look back and go, okay, now we all agree this is a part of everything. But
Mhm.
until then, you have to tag it with something to make people aware of it. This last question is really kind of, again, we started with cyberbullying a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about it for this last question, and it's interesting because just recently I was watching, the NFC AFC championship games were going on, and there was a player who actually came from my university, Joseph Asai, who was a player for the Cincinnati
Mhm.
Bengals, who made a bad play at the end and
Yep.
got a penalty. And I immediately went online to see what was going on, and the amount of vitriol and just like
Mhm.
the memes and the fact they were just destroying this man who's
Yep.
crying in tears on the sidelines. And sports is an area where I think people can feel like it's a safe space to kind of poke and prod at these
Mhm.
$1 million athletes. um but again, what are we doing when we do that? What are we modeling when we do that to
Mhm.
kids? And so my final question is really like taking those examples of what we see in everyday life that adults are, admittedly, like you said, sometimes they're doing that just to razz people up a little bit. What are some strategies we can do for kids to make them aware of it? Because I feel like cyberbullying is a couple parts. One is like someone makes a mistake online or makes a mistake in life, and then here come the trolls, right? We're
Mhm.
going to pile on top. And I think kids see that and think, okay, this is an open door for me to say or do whatever I want because this person's made a mistake in life. So how do we balance that with kids, and how do we make them more aware of it?
Well, I'm afraid that that's what they see. They see it online, they hear it in their houses. It's just it's easy to jump on, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect by any stretch, but I try to stay out of those those conversations. But I think we need to have an open conversation with kids and let them know that there are people that are very negative, and they will do things and say things, and we need to help them. How do you be better? And I'm not saying be perfect. It's how do we try to elevate others. And we've seen this, some isolated cases and places where students that were leaders, they stepped out in front and they said, I'm going to be the positive aspect,
Right.
I'm going to bring this. And not that they hated the people that were the ones that were posting the negative stuff, or but they were trying to bring this better place. How do we make, you want to live in a community that other people want to live in? And that's, to me, what citizenship is about. We want other people to join us and be a part of it. But if you're going to be negative and you're going to tear everybody down, do I really want to be there? Do I want to live in that kind of society? Or am I going to go someplace else and try to find something? And the other issue, where like-minded people tend to get together, it just tends to degrade,
Yeah.
that everyone just keeps,
Echo
cycling
chamber.
around. And I think we have to have them, our students and our children, be able to step back and say, hey, maybe this isn't the most healthy situation for you to be a part of, and maybe you need to look at something different. And or what do you want to be a part of? What do you want? And a lot of kids, when they see all of that negativeness, they will tend to back away, because they can feel that, they
Yeah.
get that. And they are a little more sensitive to some of that, that negative aspects. And they want to be separate. But the more that you're around it, the easier it becomes. And I hate to say it, but we're seeing little kids, I'm talking second, third, fourth grade, that are, they're already coming to our schools where there's so much negativeness that's built up in their homes and their communities and their families, that it's just hard to get out of. It's a
Yeah.
it's a it's a tough cycle, and to step above that is it's a tough road.
Takes a lot of work. Well,
It does.
having you as a part of my community has been a valued part of this. I appreciate you, Mike, for coming online and being a part of this. Where can people find out more about you, your great work, things you're putting out there?
Um, you know, Go to digitalcitizenship.net. All the articles and things, and if Carl will give me permission, I'll put links up there, and we'll share this out. But we've had conversations before where we've shared these, and I just it's just a place where you can find information, and hopefully learn a little bit about how we can kind of build this new community.
For sure. And Mike's going to send me those links. I'll get those out to you guys when we do the post off of this article. Those of you that have been watching live online, thank you for that. You'll probably seen a recording of this at this point. If you're still online with us, thank you for joining us. And for all of you that are a part of this conversation, know that this is just part two of a four-part series that we're doing in association with LineWise. So be sure to check out linewise.com/learn more. We're going to be joined next week by Teodora Pavkovic, and she is a cyber psychologist. This is one of those jobs that didn't exist, let's say, 10 years ago. To really delve into the psyche of what kids are going through. A lot of the things that Mike just mentioned, we're going to kind of build on those conversations as well when we talk about kids that are coming from negative places in their lives and how that impacts them online, and how they live, they survive and thrive online. That is. So we invite you to join us for that next week. Again, this same time, same place, same channel. But until then, we'll see you all next week. Thanks again, Mike. Have a great day, everybody.